Hey, good evening. Good evening. It's 6:30, so we're going to get started. My name is Erica Tazer. I'm a project manager at Environmental Design and Research, or EDR, and I will be facilitating tonight's workshop. We're doing it hybrid style, so we have virtual attendees on the Zoom and in person here at the Town Hall in Henrietta. This is a meeting for the Towns of Henrietta and Rush Joint Waterfront Revitalization Program, or LWRP. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. This is going to be the first of our 3 community workshops or open houses for this project. A few housekeeping items. Tonight's event, as I was saying, is both in person and virtual, and we'll have a presentation to kick off the event, followed by a brief Q&A session and concluding with an interactive session where people will have the chance to mingle here, look at the boards. Online, we have this really great activity where people can see the same boards and provide feedback on those boards just as they were here tonight. And I also wanted to say that the presentation will be recorded, and a recording will be posted on the town's website. So that will be henrietta.org/LWRP. Materials that are shared here tonight, so any sticky notes that you provide or comments that you leave will be shared as well. So we'll post pictures of the boards with everyone's comments on them. So next slide, please.
Do we want to make a quick announcement to the attendees that they can raise their hand? Steve, you have your normal.
Yeah, so for those participating online, during discussion, if you wish to speak, just hit the raise hand button. You can also type comments into the chat room.
Yes. We're getting the PowerPoint loaded here. Okay, so, yep, that's the right slide. I see.
Share the whole desktop. There we go.
Great. So again, welcome everyone. This is a project that has many different players in it. I'll get into that. We have the town of Henrietta and Rush working together on this LWRP, or Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. Next slide. So tonight we'll be kicking it off by introducing ourselves, who's involved with the project. Then we'll be giving an overview of what an LWRP is all about and where we are within the process. This is our first meeting. And then we'll talk about the community outreach schedule coming up, how it relates to other planning initiatives that the towns of Rush and Henrietta have already tackled. We'll talk about the boundary area, existing features within the waterfront, and a preliminary look at some possible projects that have been brought up. The second portion, as I was saying, is going to be an interactive session. And that's really to hear everyone's feedback, ideas, thoughts. We want to hear from you about the important places within the waterfront of the area, as well as any initial project ideas that you might have. And we'll explain more about what we're going to be doing later on. So next slide. I'll kick off with introductions of the project team. The project is first and foremost guided by you, the community, so the towns of Rush and Henrietta. And the final plan that we create will have to be adopted by each municipality. So at the local level, we have 3 primary forms of participation. The first is the steering committee, and we'll hear from them. The Waterfront Advisory Committee, we have several members attending tonight representing that. And you all as local community members who participate in these community workshops. The steering committee represents the towns of Henrietta and Rush, and the idea of that is to provide guidance and direction for the project. So I'm going to let the steering committee introduce themselves. We have Town Supervisor Steve Schultz, Deputy Supervisor Craig Eckert, both representing the town of Henrietta. And then we have Phyllis Wickerham on the Rush Town Board. So each of you want to say a few words about anything, introduce yourselves?
I'm Steve Schultz, Henrietta Town Supervisor. You know, we've been looking at doing some projects along the waterfront and thought we're interested in participating in the LWRP, and approached EDR, who had just completed a large comprehensive land use update for us, and asked them to put together an application. In talking with the town of Rush, they'd had some issues getting involved or getting previous plans approved. So I talked to EDR about what if we did something together. And so it's roughly 60-40 or 70-30, I think it's 70-30 split between the town of Henrietta and the town of Rush in terms of the funding, but both town boards approved it and we were successful in our grant. So the man behind the curtain, so to speak, is my Deputy Town Supervisor, Craig Eckert. Craig, if you want to introduce yourself, say hello.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. For your viewing pleasure, I will be not on the camera.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Wickerham. Is that on?
Push the little button at the bottom. There you go.
Oh, there we go. Hi, I'm Phyllis Wickerham. I am a Rush Town Board member as well as the liaison for the LWRP for the town of Rush. And we were very excited. We had a small group, not-for-profit, that was looking for grant money to work on a project, an acreage in our town, but we're not successful in getting grants approved. So when the town of Henrietta offered to include the town of Rush in this great project, we were very appreciative. Our vision in Rush is to make our waterfront more accessible and welcoming, but also making sure that we preserve the natural beauty and the resource that it is to us. So we formed our work groups and we've been doing a little brainstorming, and we really appreciate you coming tonight, both virtual and in person, to offer some more ideas. This is, like Erica said, it's not a, it's a very fluid project. We're looking, it will take some time to put these ideas and plans together. So all is welcome, and thank you very much for your input.
And I'll just add that to my left, although he's not on the advisory committee, is, excuse me, steering committee, is Rush Town Supervisor Jerry Cusi. If you want to say something, you have to push your button.
Thank you, Steve. I was very fortunate to take my elected seat when I did because the LWRP had just started, and it was a very, very welcome opportunity for me, knowing how difficult it is with a small population in Rush to get things done, and being able to have the town of Henrietta, under the guidance of Steve, invite us to come along for the ride. I think it's going to be a wonderful ride. I think that most people will benefit from it, those who are able to use the facilities, those who are able to enjoy what's going to be put in place. And it's just an exciting time for me, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for your words. So the next form of local engagement that we have is through the Waterfront Advisory Committee, who is unfortunately stuck with the name WAC. It's a committee, and they're really wonderful leaders throughout the community that meet regularly throughout the planning process and provides local insights and ideas about the LWRP, representing a variety of stakeholder groups. The WAC consists of 24 members, and tonight, as I was saying, we have several in attendance. Thanks, everyone. And that concludes the local constituent. We will be having stakeholder groups, these sessions. We've been out in the community doing pop-up events. So there will be many ways to stay engaged going forward. So another big player in an LWRP, the program, the LWRP itself, is funded and overseen by New York State Department of State. The DOS is the acronym of New York State Department of State. The representative from DOS for this project is Amy D'Agostino, and she's the Coastal Resource Specialist assigned to this project, and she will provide guidance throughout the course of the plan development. From the state's perspective, that's to ensure that we have a final plan in place that aligns with the DOS goals for the LWRP program. And the LWRP will eventually undergo a formal review from New York State Department of State before it's ready for review and adoption from the community level. EDR is who I work with, and we're the project consultant that was hired to carry through you all through this planning initiative. We'll be responsible for preparing the LWRP, the plan document itself, as well as conducting project outreach to make sure that the goals of the LWRP align with what we're hearing in the community as their desires for their local waterfront, and make sure that it's consistent with the DOS LWRP guidelines as well. So thank you again for everyone coming out tonight and being part of this process as community members. We're very excited to hear from everyone, hear your thoughts and feedbacks about your waterfront. We'll talk more about it in the upcoming slides, and there will be continued efforts to stay engaged. Next slide. So first of all, what is the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program? The LWRP is both a long-term plan and a set of strategies to implement that plan. So this is a locally prepared land and water use plan that's intended to provide revitalization opportunities for communities' waterfronts. The main goals of an LWRP are to create an inventory and analysis of issues that occur along the waterfront, and that can be natural waterfronts or developed waterfronts. Then develop strategies to implement potential projects within that waterfront, which include identifying what the project is, looking at partners and funding sources as well that are available to actually get the projects done. And then it's also to ensure that future waterfront development within the defined boundary area is consistent with LWRP policies. So there are three primary facets of a final LWRP plan. The first is, as I was saying, this inventory section, which identifies all the different places within the boundary area that are important, as well as issues or opportunities that exist for enhancing those areas. Then the strategies implement projects. And so it's important to note here that participation in the DOS LWRP program opens up grant funds that then can be used through the New York State Environmental Protection Fund to fund the projects and actually get them done. There's other state, federal, and private funding programs that exist too and can be used as well. And then the third important component of the LWRP are the consistency policies. So these are used to guide all federal actions at future actions at different levels of government, ranging from local, state, and federal. So an approved LWRP allows for coordination between all of these different levels of government to effectively manage the waterfront resources within the boundary area. There are 44 policies that are enforceable statements of action that support the most beneficial use of these resources that occur within the boundary area. Next slide. So a core part of the LWRP process is community outreach and engagement. LWRPs need to be supported and adopted by the local communities. Core principles of this outreach is to listen, educate, and communicate throughout. So we'll be listening to ideas shared by everyone regarding different recommendations or policies. We'll be educating people about the different resources that are in their own backyards. A lot of times people don't know about their own waterfronts because we've developed against them, so we don't even know they're there. So we'll be sharing the information that we collect throughout the process with everyone. And then communication, of course, is essential throughout, and we'll be doing that through community outreach. And there's many ways to reach us. There's a project website, which I'll share. It's henrietta.org/LWRP, where you can reach out with questions or comments throughout the process. So if you don't know, we began reaching out to the community about a month ago. We attended the Rush Fire Department picnic and also the Town of Henrietta concert series, passing out postcards to get the word out about this meeting, about the project in general. Following this meeting, we'll have another community workshop coming up in the winter, early spring, and then that will be followed up by an open house as the project concludes in fall 2022. We'll be reaching out to email to everyone that left us their email so you can stay engaged throughout the course of the project about these outreach events. And throughout the duration, the Waterfront Advisory Committee, Steering Committee, and stakeholder working groups will be meeting to guide the development of the work products like the inventory, the projects, and the policies. So as Steve was mentioning, the development of this LWRP really does build off of previous planning efforts that both the town of Henrietta and the town of Rush have already achieved and accomplished. In the town of Henrietta, we've examined the 2019 comprehensive plan update, and this expands upon the town's existing agricultural and transportation plans. That was a big focus of that. It provides recommendations for revitalizing existing structures rather than new site development, and it provides specific recommendations for zoning updates and policies to allow for mixed-use development, incentive zoning, and complete streets. The 2016 active transportation plan includes information about the town's vision for developing a network of sidewalks, trails, and other transportation improvements. And then the agricultural plan that the town did in 2018 promotes the preservation and maintenance of agricultural land through zoning updates, land use incentives, and other land use tools that are out there. We'll also be looking at the East River Road corridor traffic study and the design guidelines that have been updated in recent years. From the town of Rush's end, we have the 2010 comprehensive plan. That one highlighted a lot of agricultural and land use along the Genesee River, so that's really important to this LWRP. It provides recommendations for preserving these areas, improving infrastructure, and increasing open space and public access through recreation. The town of Rush also has a farmland protection plan and also includes similar information about land use preservation. We'll also be looking at the Rush Riverside report that created about this area that's being called the Rush Riverside Refuge, the former Youth and BOCES land parcels. We also have reports from the Energy Advisory Committee in the town of Rush and the Hamlet of Rush Community Charrette report. At a regional level, we also look at regional planning and align it with that as well. So we have the County Hazard Mitigation Plan and the Regional Economic Development Council's Finger Lakes Forward plan to build upon as well. Next slide. So this is about the boundary. So the policies, projects, and strategies described in the LWRP will be implemented within this defined area known as the Waterfront Revitalization Area. The boundary should be based on a series of criteria, the boundary should consider areas impacted by waterfront issues and opportunities, focusing on water-based uses, natural and cultural resources associated with the waterfront, areas necessary for the achievement of the LWRP policies. So for example, if there's a project occurring within a particular parcel, the whole parcel should be included within the boundary. And then to the extent possible, the boundary should follow recognizable features so that it can be described. So things like waterways, streets, railroads, etc. The WRA, or boundary from north to south, occurs along the western boundaries of both towns and follows the Genesee River. It also includes an area around the Erie Canal that transects the northeastern corner of the town of Henrietta near Lock 32 at the JCC. More details about this boundary can be found on the meeting boards that we'll show here tonight, and will be available for both in-person and virtual attendees. Next slide. So the next part of the LWRP is the inventory and analysis, which is a comprehensive description of all existing features of the waterfront. The WRA includes two major water bodies, the Genesee River and the Erie Canal. However, it also includes small portions of the Honeoye Creek in the town of Rush and small ponds and tributaries that flow into the Genesee River. This section of the LWRP looks at existing land uses, conditions and availability of infrastructure, archaeological or historic resources, and environmental quality data, along with other data as well. For this meeting, we're presenting some maps that we've created based on this information. Things like existing natural and recreational features, wetlands, trails, and other natural resources shown here on the map. Next slide. The LWRP policies, yes, regard the waterfront revitalization area and are critical to a successful LWRP. The 10 main subject areas of the 44 LWRP policies are demonstrated here. Local, federal, and state agencies review consistency with these policies when undertaking funding decisions and actions for proposed projects or other development activities located within the waterfront area. Local governments are responsible for evaluating proposed actions in the WRA to determine whether they are consistent with the approved LWRP. This is done through a form, a consistency review form, and this tool will be also adopted by the local governments at the same time as the approved LWRP. Next slide. As of now, there are about 18 potential project ideas that have been identified by the Waterfront Advisory Committee and Steering Committee. 11 projects are fairly detailed enough to provide a brief description of for you all tonight. So we have information about those projects on the boards. Other projects have been identified, but we still need to develop more information before presenting them. These are just our initial ideas, and we're looking for community input to evolve them, or if they make no sense, we can remove them from consideration. However, I would like to note that eventually the goal is for these projects to become eligible for funding from New York State or other funding agencies. So while we do want some of the projects to be detailed enough to be achievable, we can refine some big ideas further in years to come later on in the process, even after the LWRP is adopted. So at this point, it's good to think outside of the box and even come up with new project ideas. Even if a project's not ready to be implemented in the next few years, expressing ideas within the LWRP can create opportunities later on. So just because something is not in the plan, on the flip side, doesn't mean it has to get done. If later on we decide that we do not want to implement projects, or if third parties become involved, such as property owners that are nearby that are against it, we can just, the town rather, can just decide not to apply for funding and not to implement those projects. But if it's not in the plan, the important thing to remember is that if it's not in the plan, it's much more difficult to access those funds later on. So tonight, we'll just be describing high-level descriptions of the projects at this meeting, with the understanding that we'll be further detailing them out in years or in upcoming months. So proposed projects that are being discussed here tonight for the town of Henrietta include the following. Starting at the northeastern end corner near the Erie Canal is the proposed canal side path and Towpath Village project, which would include public space along the towpath, shops, cafes, kayak rentals, pavilions, or other public plazas, and an amphitheater, along with other recreational amenities. Moving west to the Genesee River, the first project to the north starts at the Ballantine Bridge and would be a recreational area, such as a fishing pier and a kayak launch. Following the river to the south, we have the Riverwalk extension, which would begin at the Riverwood Tech campus, extending south to the Lehigh Valley Trail Diamond Branch Bridge crossing. All of this is on a map in the boards that you can see. The trail would intersect key recreational areas such as the Riverbend Park, Breeze Park, and the Riverton Golf Course. Breeze Park is its own standalone proposed project as well, and would include enhancements like a pavilion, restrooms, and expansion to existing trails. There are also proposed Riverbend Park improvements, which may include adding a restroom and stabilizing the shoreline to prevent further erosion. Other LWRP projects proposed within Henrietta are still being discussed with primary third-party property owners involved, and include things like the Chesapeake Pond Park, Westminster Road development, East River Road sidewalk interconnect, Lake Pamela improvements, and the Riverton Golf Course improvements. So that's Henrietta. In the town of Rush, proposed projects include the Rush Riverside Refuge, specifically to the east of the railroad, with goals to improve trail connectivity to the 100-acre woods and the Monroe County Fairgrounds, New York Transportation Museum, and Rochester and Genesee Valley Railroad Museum. Along with expanding trails, looking into expanding water systems in some of these locations to create capacity for holding larger public events at these sites. The northwest portion of the Rush Riverside Refuge includes the Transportation Museum, which is proposing to enhance its trail system, interpretive signage, and other outdoor amenities. Additional enhancements include parking lot improvements and driveway improvements, and linking the trolley line to the Railroad Museum. So just south of the Transportation Museum, within the eastern part of the Rush Riverside Refuge area, is the Monroe County Fairgrounds. Here, proposed improvements include indoor-outdoor exhibit space improvements, and as I was mentioning before, water line development. Other projects in Rush include the 100-acre woods, and this is the area that borders the western side of the railroads near the Genesee River. Proposed improvements here include increasing public accessibility and recreational opportunities in natural areas. Other proposed ideas include kayak and canoe access points at the historical Cox Ferry site, expanding the existing trail system, installing footbridges over creeks, and other projects, including riverbank stabilization. The Railroad Museum is located in the southern portion near the 100-acre woods, or within it rather, and improvements here might include parking improvements, trail maintenance improvements. And finally, in Rush, the Black Diamond Interconnect connects in with the Lehigh Valley Trail, which is a great regional trail to bring people into the town. And this would improve the trail system as well as create connections for the proposed Riverwalk Trail, which ultimately would create a trail corridor that spans the entire length of the town of Henrietta and Rush. And again, more information on these projects is included on the boards. You can talk to people with name tags and they can, try to answer any questions about what we've talked about to date, as well as we want to hear from you about these projects and any additional projects as well. Next slide. So this is just giving people a lay of the land here, what's presented on the boards. After this presentation, we're going to have a brief Q&A session and then open it up for this open house where people can review the boards at their leisure, gather information, give us your feedback, and participate that way. We also have 2 highly interactive boards that we want to hear people's thoughts on, just asking people about what are the problems facing the waterfronts, what are the issues that exist today, and then going forward, what are some solutions? So what are some opportunities that you see existing, as well as where are important places that you identify with? So these boards will be, as I was saying, available both virtually and in person. We'll have 2 people from EDR, Jane Rice and Sam Gordon, facilitating the virtual session, and they'll give instructions on how to do that. And so all the boards that will be viewed are in these same groups. So the first group is, information about the project. So what's the LWRP, overview of the Henrietta Rush project itself, our timeline, then what LWRPs typically consist of, or the policies rather, what the policies discuss, as well as the existing conditions that we've collected data on. So existing planning efforts, natural resources, and recreational areas. There's sticky notes on the bottom of each board for the in-person participants tonight. We want to hear your thoughts. And then, so those are kind of the informational boards. Next slide. These boards are more interactive. So we have the project boards, which are in the back of the room here, and will be on the Jamboard shared with the virtual attendees. And as I was saying, these are preliminary projects, just in the beginning stages of being discussed and defined. So want to hear your questions, feedback. If you have new project ideas, share those. And then we have, as I was saying, the question board for everyone. So identifying the assets and opportunities of the project or the waterfront revitalization area, as well as some problems that you see existing today. So we will have no formal ending to the session tonight. People are free to leave when they please. We'll be here till 8 p.m. And we will have this Q&A session. So depending on how long the Q&A session goes, we may have 45 minutes for just the open house portion of it. Let me see. During the open house, we'll shut off the computer audio and let the virtual participants do their thing. Look at the boards virtually, and then if you have any questions, feel free to ask us with name tags on. We really want to hear from you though, so give us your comments on sticky notes and help us analyze areas that need to be included as a project or thought about to revitalize the waterfront here. I guess some more information about the interactive boards. We just have some sample questions here. So things to think about and thoughts to share with us. Where are the important places to you? What opportunities might be there today, tomorrow, to revitalize the waterfront? What are some trends that you see? Are there important areas that would, if revitalized, contribute to the local economy or culture of the area? What are some areas that could be enhanced to promote public access or protection of natural resources? And then on the other side, issues and threats facing the waterfront, things like infrastructure, improvements that are needed, development patterns that you've witnessed, scenic areas that should be opened up or protected. Other areas of concern might be related to flooding and erosion, water quality, natural habitat protection, public access. So just let us know what you think about your own personal think about your own personal use of the waterfront or non-use and how that could be improved. We want to hear about the ways you interact with your waterfront. So we're now going to open the floor for a brief Q&A session with everyone. Steve, I understand you're going to be moderating that. And virtual participants, if you raise your hand, Craig Eckert will be able to unmute you. So it's going to be a hybrid Q&A session. So we'll have in-person questions and virtual questions that we can hear on the speakers here in the town hall. So I'll get started on that. So in person, if you could please, for the sake of the virtual participants, come up and speak into the microphone so that we can all hear each other that way.
Is there anyone who has a question? Either coming up? So just state your name and ask away.
Rick Hart, and I live in Rush, New York. I was just wondering if in the discussion, if there had been a look at resources for crew and a location for crew boats, for boats. The closest ones, the closest crew locations are farther down in like Pittsford and areas like that, as opposed to anything up in this area. And I was just wondering if that had come up in any discussion as a potential program.
There was a potential discussion of a boat launch in Breeze Park, which is in the southern part of Henrietta. I don't necessarily know what I don't necessarily know all the details of cruise, so I would love to know what that entails. Is it different than a typical launch, or?
When my wife returns from Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan in about a week and a half, she was an officer in crew in the Albany, New York area, and she could give all that resource information.
That would be great. So you can contact me at supervisor@henrietta.org, and we'll make sure that gets included. Thank you.
And the other thing, we can always use extra people on our work groups. So if you're interested in that, you can always contact me as well.
Craig, do we have anyone online with their hands raised? Anybody else?
Anybody with their hand raised?
In the audience? Coming up?
My name is Lee Laughlin. Live at 42 Westminster Park. There are actually a number of neighbors here who are also represented here from Westminster Park. We're interested in proposal number 5. And so we've had a number of questions regarding that proposal. We'd like to get engaged, become engaged, get involved with that proposal at every level possible. So if we can, we'd like to get on any mailing lists, any communications coming out of this board or session. That'd be greatly helpful for us.
Yeah, so we're about to form the working group. So the reason that one's not discussed is we haven't had a chance to get with the residents there. And just to give, as I was explaining to someone who had emailed me, where the origin of that came from, sometime back, another number of residents had asked whether it was possible to convert Westminster to a public road. And would not be easily done. It would require more money than we have in our budgets. And so when this came up, I raised the question, is it possible we could use LWRP money for that? So that was just the origins of the idea. It really hasn't developed much beyond that. The drawing you see on there was just, you have to start with something. So I just drew something up. But that's as far as it's gotten, because, you know, again, the reason it's one of the ones that isn't on the boards here is there's a couple of them where I've already reached out to the local groups. So for instance, on the canal, it's the JCC. For the Lake Pamela, it's the Riverton Community Association. I hadn't had a chance to get to your group yet, which is why you're not on the discussion, but we would be starting a working group, and we would love some active participants as far as, does it make sense to, you know, make it a public road? Would the people involved who own it, the private road, be willing to take part in that? is there some give and take that might have to come in? And that's kind of was the idea of, I'm assuming there would be, that was the idea of, could, as part of that, we make in the entrance, you know, be a commercial site or something like that. So for like a, you know, like a burned dairy, for instance, those kinds of things. So again, none of these ideas they're just nebulous ideas, and we would love to get together with a bunch of the folks and just brainstorm and see, does it make sense? And ultimately, if it doesn't, we take it off of there. But again, if it's ever a possibility of that becoming a public road, it would need a lot of funding, and this is a potential source for that funding. So
Sure, and
does that make sense?
Appreciated. So when you do create that group, I think we have our email here.
So yeah, so again, if you email me at supervisor@henrietta.org and just say you want to be part of that working group, we'll put that together. We're probably looking at later this month having our first working group meeting. So, okay, thank you. And later tonight during the breakout. Yeah, so what we can do too, though, is we can have a little bit more discussions during the breakout. I'm going to be moving around to different groups and stuff like that. So you bet. Anyone online yet, Craig?
No, I have no hands raised online.
Anyone else in house? Then it sounds like, I guess we would be ready to go to the breakout.
Yes, so we're going to get started with the breakouts. Let me describe a little bit how this is going to work.
Hold on, before that, are you describing should we do the separation?
I just had a couple high-level
Okay.
things for people. So just so everyone knows, we have Post-it notes available here in the room for everyone to write your comments on. The in-person interactive boards are over here by the door. We'll spread them out so people can really see everyone's ideas together and provide their own, and of course, provide your own thoughts on any of the boards here. Just so everyone knows what's going on virtually, we're going to have people use an interactive tool called Jamboard, and the links to the Google Jamboards will be provided in the chat on the Zoom. There will be some moderators to explain more details about how that works. And we'll have screenshots of all the boards or pictures of all the boards presented on the website for people to review afterwards. I also wanted to share information because we're not having a formal ending to this. I just wanted to share some information. Craig, could you share the screen again of the PowerPoint?
Hold on. That's the,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just giving some closing information before we split up into the open house. As I was saying, we'll be preparing notes. This is the website. Stay tuned for this next upcoming workshop. And please keep reaching out, you know, as you talk to people in your community or think of things after this meeting. That would be good to include in the LWRP. And thank you so much for everyone to come out tonight and start this project off with us. So with that, we'll split up into in-person and virtual. Oh, one more question. Yes, come on up.
I don't know if I'll be using this trail. I can hardly walk from the seat to here, but Alinus Rautenstrauch, Henrietta, New York. I think it's a great, great concept. The money's coming from the federal government, which we pay into, but is it coming from there or?
State.
State, okay. It starts in Brighton. They're part of it too. Does it start in Brighton? Valentine Bridge only, you said?
Correct. Valentine Bridge south on the river, and
You said Erie Canal someplace.
yeah, so the Erie Canal does go into Henrietta. The JCC property The town line goes right through the middle of it, so this is on the southern portion. With that said, not necessarily from a LWRP standpoint, but from a couple potential joint projects, looking down the road as a way to split costs for maintaining some of the stuff. I've been having discussions with Supervisor Melee from the town of Brighton.
My one interest is down the road, I doubt that every one of these locations will be incorporated due to money.
Right.
And the big thing is, who will maintain all this area from Valentine down into Rush? I just saw a photo up there. Looks like, is that the Genesee River you were showing us? Or is that some other place?
Yeah, the Genesee River is the main
Put
river.
some dye in it to make it look as good as it does? Well, I didn't see any logs in there, so that was great. I'm glad they
Just have to pick the right time of year.
Well, yeah, right. Okay, a little humor, but the maintenance and who's going to maintain all these locations, and who's going to be safeguard over all those, and who's going to provide service for injuries, accidents, law enforcement. I mean, these are, we don't want to hear those things, but they are real things that happen. And there's a lot. Where's the money going to be in 2028, 29, 30? So it's just something to throw out there. And I hate to say it, I would put the kibosh to something like that because all these people would be throwing things at me. But the bottom line is that it is a real thing. Some locations there would be a wonderful asset. It's a great opportunity to improve and enhance Henrietta. There is no doubt about it. But I'm just putting that out there with the fire, the EMT, police, and everything else, and locations and pavement and infrastructure. You may not have thought about that, some of the people incorporating this, but maybe you have. And if you have, God bless. But it's really, really important. And is there any estimated time that this would take if it gets started in 2 years? Would it take 3, 4, 5 years to do? I'm just curious.
So the plan itself, I'm pushing to accelerate it, to have the plan in place in time to be able to go after some funding for next year. Typically, is it what, fall? Is when?
Yeah, CFA season is usually in the end of July.
Right.
Which is
so the goal is to have the plan in place by then so that we can actually go after some of it.
Well,
as far as, just let me finish, please. As far as the whole thing, I don't know if it'll ever get done. Again, the idea is we have more things in there than we're potentially ever going to do, because as things change, we may decide, you know what was important in 2021, not so important in 2028. So we're trying to look down the road into the future some as well. But I absolutely have been looking at that maintenance again. That's why I was talking with Supervisor Melee, because some of the stuff up on the canal, especially, we would have to figure out how does that stuff get maintained. In terms of the Riverwalk, there's already a large stretch of Riverwalk present. It's just not connected to anything. People aren't aware of it. There's actually about 4 of them, and they don't connect to each other. So, in terms of maintaining the trails, that would be our Parks and Rec, specifically the DPW, whose job, grounds and facilities, to keep the trailways clear, stuff like that. A lot of the stuff is already in town parks. So we already have the liability, we already have the EMT coverage and the legal coverage and the maintenance requirements. So a lot of it's just changing what we're putting in. And, like one of the ones, to bring up an example, instead of always having to bring in porta potties every time we hold an event, the idea is let's put restrooms that are on septic. There is some cost to maintain that. We would build that in. Again, I think you know me by now enough that I'm not going to take on a project that isn't sustainable. So we will absolutely look at that. That if we can't figure out a way to maintain it, we're not going to do it, because I don't want to build something that then crumbles.
I agree.
Supervisor, if I might, I want to add on too, we've had some beginning in conversations with the fire department regarding infrastructure additions to what would be, I think it's number 3.
Yeah, so station number 3, actually, the Genesee Valley station actually services the river, yet they don't have a boat launch. They have a boat right in their facility. So one of the things we're potentially adding another project here, which would be to make improvements to that fire station, including they have a community room that people in the neighborhood can use, and yet it's on the 2nd floor and there is no elevator, there is no handicap access. We'd be looking at that and potentially a launch so that they could actually launch their boat right front. So, you know, God forbid there's a boat fire on the river or even a fire on a property on the riverfront, they would be able to come at it from the riverside.
The thing that you just mentioned, the fire department. Every time you talk fire department and one little inch of thinking, the dynamics of taxes skyrocket. So let's not even, I mean, that's a real fact.
I know.
So you don't have to go into any more. We know just how expensive the fire department is. And listen, I don't want to get into all of that. They do a hell of a service. They are very, very good. It's just that the people that will be enjoying this will also be from other towns, which is wonderful, but they're not paying towards the fire department and the services.
Understood, but the idea is if we can use Department of State funds to make those improvements to the waterfront fire service rather than using town of Henrietta and see the double-digit increases that we've been seeing, which, as you know, drive me nuts. I'm all for that, so.
Good luck.
Thank you.
God bless. Thank you.
Erica, we have an online question.
Yep.
Yes. The question was from Bridget and Mike Andre, and it was similar to your question, sir. Sorry if I missed this, but are you anticipating funding all the projects? If not, how will you determine which projects are being funded?
So again, I don't know that we would do all of them. The decision would be made at budget time because with all these, there is a local share, if you will. It was typically 20%.
25%.
25%. So we would have to match. Yeah, so it's 25% of what they give or 20% of the total, right? So if they put in 100,000, we have to match with 25.
Yeah.
So so a lot of that will be made at budget time, and we'll basically look to see what is available. And as was just discussed, we'll make sure it's something that is sustainable. So if it's something that, for instance, we have to bring on an additional person in facilities to be able to maintain those trails, if we're building a trail, then we wouldn't do it until we have enough money in the budget to be able to put that person on board. You know, in terms of from a tax standpoint, for the past 3 years, we've grown our DPW without increasing the tax levy 1 penny. So it is possible. That's the kind of stuff we will look forward, but the decision will be made at the town board level, both in the town of Rush and in the town of Henrietta. So for the projects in Rush, it would be the town of Rush that would be doing the match. And obviously for projects in the town of Henrietta, it would be the town of Henrietta that would be doing the match. So that's a decision that would be made at the town board level by resolution. I don't think there's any projects that would go high enough into a dollar value to where it would be a referendum, but you know, like I said, I think you're looking at, that's essentially how the decisions would be made.
One thing to add is that as an added safeguard, the New York State typically wants to see these projects successful. So in the grant application itself, they'll be asking questions about how is this going to be maintained and operated and all these logistical questions. Just thinking of that as you're talking. Any other questions before we break out for our open house session? I have one question. Yes.
It's good to see you. Rob Burley. The vision for the waterway. Is that going to be similar to what we see down at Cobb's Hill on both sides of the Genesee River, the boat slits and things like that? What they did down there is very beautiful, and it's getting a lot of use down with all the shops. And, you know, we go to Pittsburgh for the canal, some of those things. Looking at the canal amphitheater, that would be nice in our town too, for both towns. So I just had a question about that.
Yeah, so as far as the like Cornhill Landing, I don't think there's any place in town where that works. You know, one of the things that's interesting is some of the waterfront properties, that's actually some of the oldest portions of town. If you go back to the days of maps when there were maybe a dozen roads in Henrietta, the ones Shore Drive and Riverview, River Meadow, I don't know about Westminster since it was a private road, but those have been there almost as long as the town. Maybe some of them as long as the town. So there aren't a whole lot of places where that potentially could go. But if somebody has some ideas, especially if a property owner came to us and said, you know what, we'd like to look at doing something like that, you know, maybe in the stretch north of Riverview, River Meadow, that area, and south of Valentine Bridge. That's about the only place I could see where it goes. There are some apartments there. You know, if it would require, we could put a mixed-use development overlay there, just like we have in some other portions of town, so that it could be, you know, commercial on the first floor and apartments on the upper floors. So that is it's not ruled out, but there is nothing there today because, again, any project like that would require the property owners to essentially help lead that because the town lands along there are all parks, and we'd have to go through parkland alienation. In addition, in a lot of stretches, you have problems of you'd be in the floodplain where you couldn't put houses anyways. In some portions, the banks are much higher and you can actually put houses right next to the river. In other places, you can't. So like I said, it's not out of the question, but as it would require essentially a project leader. But again, our part might be putting in the legislation that lets it happen, putting in, you know, looking at what would have to happen for East River Road to accommodate the traffic impacts of that, things like that. As anyone who lives off of East River Road or has to travel it, it's a problem right now. The good news is the county is getting close to where they're going to be implementing some of the significant improvements to that corridor based off of the plan we put together years ago. So.
And we are taking notes of all of these questions, but you know, the more that we can hear it in writing. So if you have ideas for projects, you know, get them on those sticky notes and we could get that in the plan.
And before we break up, if you haven't had a chance to sign into our attendance sheet with your email, we would really appreciate that. So with that said, thank you.
Any other questions? And it looks like we're ready for breakout.
Yep, and we can keep the boards here. We'll collect the sticky notes, but the boards will be available at the town office as well afterwards.
Jane and Sam, are you ready to take over?
Yes, sir.
We're ready to
Okay,
go.
go ahead.